there's a lot of times murder comes this wave of loss and grief. I think that is more profound sometimes than a loss that people experience that is expected or something comes from unexpected death.
Crime is one of those things where we just want to compartmentalize it and separate it from our lives.
It's a cultural, societal thing that we just kind of fall into. We end up putting people on the outskirts that we cannot relate to. If we can't relate to somebody who has suffered a loss in a crime because we haven't experienced it ourselves, we have a hard time being able to talk about it as a community, as a society, and as a nation.
We're a very holistic organization, and we partner with other groups. Once somebody's committed a felony crime, which is where we focus, yes, you have to be tough in that moment because you've got to have some deterrent. The society has to step in, and we're so thankful Crime Stoppers gets to play a role in that, and we hope to continue doing it.
Welcome to another episode of The Final Curtain Never Closes. Today, I have a guest with us that I find very fascinating, and I'm really interested in diving into a lot of questions that a lot of people might not understand what goes on the other side or the depths of crime and how it affects our families. Today, I have Rania Mankarious with us, and she is the CEO of Crime Stoppers here in our fine city of Houston. Welcome, Rania.
Hi, Genevieve. Thank you for having me.
You know, when Freddie came to me and said, hey, I have a fabulous guest for the show, it's Rania, and she's with Crime Stoppers here in Houston. How would you like to do a podcast with her? And I said, first, I had a moment of pause because I think it's the same moment of pause that people have when we hear about crimes is that, how does that fit into The Final Curtain Never Closes? And then he finally said, with crime, there's a lot of times murder. With murder comes this wave of loss and grief. I think that is more profound sometimes. This pause that comes from understanding that there's so much more grief that comes with the sudden loss associated with a crime. And if you don't mind, I'd like to dive into some of that today to help make people more aware. The news nowadays, I tend to find myself doing a news fast because you always learn, like in the first 5 minutes of the news, you learn all about the crime that happens in our city. And with that, majority of it is, you're hearing that people pass away, people die because of this crime. And I'd like to learn more about how Crime Stoppers truly helps these families that are affected by the crime.
I mean, first of all, I thank you, Freddie, for recommending us. Freddie is just a Houston gem, and I've had the privilege of working with him for many years. We all should be thankful. If we know him, we're lucky. And I've always said that about Freddie. But it's, what? I appreciate that he recommended us because people often overlook the impact of the work that we do and what it requires on behalf of our staff and our team and the impact it has on the city. Crime is one of those things where we just want to compartmentalize it and separate it from our lives. And we really can't because it affects every nook and cranny of our lifestyle. It's behind the scenes when we decide where we're going to live, where we're going to send our kids to school. It's playing in the background directly. Even sometimes you don't realize it when you're scoping out your kids' friends and choices they're making. And loss is such a huge part of what we do, whether it's the sudden loss of a life. I deal with the trauma of parents calling and saying, my child's gone. My child's gone. I mean, we were planning their birthday party and my child's gone, to the loss of parents saying their innocence has been stripped from them. They will never be the same again. Never be the same again. And it is an everyday reality of what we deal with. And understanding that is a huge part of our job, but also communicating it is really, really important. So the community can sort of understand what we deal with, and how we all kind of will deal with the ramifications as a society, whether or not we knew the students who lost their lives in an active shooting at school. Well, we may not know those students, but school culture will change forevermore. We may not know the child that was inappropriately taken advantage of online, but the impact of that student and the repercussions and ramifications it creates a cycle that we all end up shifting our lives because of. So I appreciate the questions and I appreciate the conversation. I think for us, what we've realized is loss is it's permanent.
Hmm.
It's so final. You cannot go back. You cannot go back. There's the trauma that might be leading up to a loss. Like we know we'll have parents that will call and say, listen, if we don't do something about our son, he's going to end up killed. He's going to end up killed. He's in a gang. He's in a cycle. It's crime. It's getting more egregious. He's going to end up losing his life. We also deal with the trauma following a sudden impact and a sudden loss. So there's many different levels of it. And I lost my father 2 years ago and started to look at loss, differently and asking myself, well, how does loss compare for me when I watched my father slowly end his life at 87 to loss of someone that was shot while shopping? How does my loss compare to their loss? Where does the trauma fit in? How does it fit in differently for both of us? What conversation should we all be having about loss? We don't want to talk about it. It's hard to talk about, but we need to.
It's hard to talk about because I think a lot of times one we don't want to embrace the fact that our loved one has passed away or
Yeah.
something terrible has happened to us. But I also think that too, I've had the unique opportunity to step outside our country and live
Hmm.
in another country, and because of that, looking back on the United States when living in Europe, I realized how death denying we are as a society.
Yeah.
It's a cultural, societal thing that we just kind of fall into. And I think with that, we end up putting people on the outskirts that we cannot relate to.
Hmm.
If we can't relate to somebody who has suffered a loss in a crime, or we haven't been able to relate to somebody who has a loss naturally because we haven't experienced it ourselves, or we're seeing it on television, we're exposed to it, but our level of attachment does not exist. And when we detach that ability to understand, relate, or empathize, I think that's where we have a hard time being able to talk about it
Yeah.
as a community, as a society, and as a nation.
Well, and I'll add another layer to that. There's that sense of detachment, but really it comes from fear. You know,
Oh yes.
I don't want to deal with this. And as much as I can keep it away, that means it's not my life. I don't have to. I've put up walls. I've made sure I'm in a good zip code. I've made sure I'm in a good school. I made sure that I work in a safe part of town. My job has very minimal risk. I've already indirectly put up enough walls where I shouldn't have to deal with this.
Oh,
You
I
know,
completely agree with you.
yeah.
My husband and I, we were shot at in our own backyard
Oh.
one night, just relaxing, and I can tell you that the trauma associated with that was a domino effect. And I was like, okay, we have to move. We can't have a forest in the backyard. We need to have a gated community. And I all of a sudden just put up all these walls
Mm-hmm.
that gave me a sense of protection from that trauma. So yeah, I get it. But what happens when we're not able to do that? We're not able to put up those walls of protection, or we've already been a victim of that trauma, and the we weren't able to protect ourselves, and now we're in it. And if I can
Yeah.
ask, from the time that somebody is a victim of a crime, whether it's a crime of robbery or a crime of murder, how soon do you at Crime Stoppers step in and start working with those individuals that have been traumatized?
Oftentimes immediately. Oftentimes they will get connected to us through a community member, through police department. just through the wave, the impact of what's happening. They start now, depending on how high profile, usually when it's a murder, usually it's a murder of a child, the more complicated the case, the quicker the media steps in. And very quickly, they'll be pushed sort of in our direction. And we are there to hold their hand, to help them deal with the media, because the media has a very important role to tell the story and help us put the pieces together and engage the community's eyes and ears to fill in those gaps. We obviously want to be working with law enforcement. The victim family needs to work with their investigators, who are uh, going to be the only route to justice that the family can have. So we want to help them do that. There's sometimes the need for legislative change. You know, we had one case where a little baby was shot during a drive-by shooting, and
Mm.
after all the medical, he didn't die, but after all the medical treatment was said and done, we're bringing this young child right back to that home with bullets, and we thought, well, there's victim compensation and there are victim rights, but nothing that helps a family in this situation. It's more like if there's a family violence case, we'll help. There's a little bit of money in the state to help you move and go somewhere else to be for protection. But what about the trauma of going back to the same spot and going into a room where you see bullets everywhere? So shouldn't there be an allocation of funds to help you start over in a new place where the trauma is not there? So we'll look at that. And then, you know, one of the victims, a mom of a young girl that was shot just while the family was driving, running errands in the Houston area, she said something very poignant. She said, you know, whether or not the suspect is found, whether or not the suspect goes to jail, whether or not justice is served, no matter what, we, mom, dad, brother, sister, we face the life sentence. We face
Very true.
a sentence. We're not going to have her for her next birthday. We're never going to see her graduate middle school or high school, or know what she was go to college, or know what her future was going to be, who she might marry, what those kids were going. We will never know, and we will never not think about that. And so there's more to the story. There's the justice seeking. There's the feeling of anger. There's the we need this can't happen, and we've identified a massive loophole in the law. But then there's and then life. How do you continue to parent a lost child? Well, there are things we can do. You know, we work with commissioners to put things in parks that are everlasting in memory of those children. There's more to the story. So we are involved in all of that. And often victims will say, when everyone else has forgotten about us, Crime Stoppers is still there working arm in arm with us.
Wow. Yeah, that was another question I had was how long do you end up working with a family and is it for the the lifespan of the family or is it a limited amount of time?
So for us, there's no such thing as a cold case. So for us, in terms of the functionality of the case, the justice system, we will always be offering our reward until the case is solved. Until police department says we're good, this is a closed case. We'll work it in partnership with media and with the community. On the flip side, there's that other arm of dealing with the emotions and the mental health impact. We're not providing mental health services, but we are making sure that that unit, that family, that person is in touch with keeping us as a central nucleus for them. Okay, are you still seeing how's that going? We're going to still work on this legislative change. Oh, the law's been passed, but now it's somebody's adding another layer to it. The trees that we planted in honor of your children, the benches. We have benches now that will be going up across Commissioner Ramsey's 77 parks in honor of lost loved ones. Let's get you into that. We even have, and we're the first organization to do it, but oftentimes parents will pass while the perpetrator is, so the perpetrator's been
Oh yeah.
arrested, charged, they're now in prison, and the parents will pass, but they'll be up, the perpetrator will be up for parole in maybe another 20 years. Well, we're the
Mm.
first group to ever sit down with the victim family and record their victim impact statement. So
Wow.
even after they pass, that video lives on and on and on and can be shown in hearings in the future when that perpetrator's up for parole. Now, I will say we are a very holistic organization. So on the one hand, while we believe in crime and punishment and justice, and we want to make sure that we are tough on crime because we've got to mitigate it. We are also for fair and just punishment. We want speedy trials, we want fair outcomes, and we want rehabilitation. So it's not our goal to see these people serve like everybody's in prison for life and throw away the key and never look at them again. It is our goal to have a very comprehensive system that looks at all moving parts, including rehabilitation of the offender.
I'm talking to you, and I'm quite profound to learn the depth of your guys' interaction with the entire crime itself. But yet, you guys are like the people behind the scenes, the people
Yeah.
that you're never talked about. I can say for myself that the only time I hear about Crime Stoppers is perhaps when a reward is being offered
I
in
know.
trying to help catch the perpetrator or get more information about the crime itself. Then you might hear, Crime Stoppers is offering a reward. Um, but never have I ever heard about the work that you guys actually do, and how deep it runs. And I'm truly grateful that I'm able to talk to you about this, and hopefully make many more people aware um, about the importance of your work. Let's hope and pray they never need it.
Yes.
But at the same time, knowing that you guys are there and that you're a wealth of resources, it sounds like.
Victims always say, we hope no one ever has to know how much they'll need you. And we hope people will continue to still allow you guys to do the work you're doing because, of course, we are a nonprofit. So we rely on donations and foundations and grants. And so you never think about how thankful we are and the people we serve are for those who take a moment to see the value of our work and say, we want to make sure you're still doing what you're doing.
And how long has Crime Stoppers been around?
We're going on 44 years.
Wow.
I
And
know.
how long have you been with Crime Stoppers?
It will be 20 years soon.
Wow.
Can you believe it? I can't, I moved from Boston and wasn't sure where I would land here. And I'm an attorney, or, my background, I'm a lawyer with a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And everyone said, oh, you'll do family law. But I didn't want to do family law because it's hard for me to see families separate. And it's not where I wanted to be. And then they said, well, you'll do estate planning. And I said, okay, I'll do that. But I'm not a good numbers person. I'm not the person you want doing that. And so a friend in New York said, you know what, nonprofits in Houston are just, they're above everywhere else. And just look in the nonprofit sector. And Crime Stoppers was 2006 looking for a lawyer with marketing experience, which is what I had. And I never.
Wow. That's amazing. How has Crime Stoppers changed in the last 20 years?
A lot. So Crime Stoppers originated in Crime Stoppers, there are Crime Stoppers throughout the world. There are about 3,500, 3,700 last we checked. And they all operate a tip line. And it's an anonymous tip line. It's protected by state statute wherever it's located. And it helps support the police department when they're working felony cases. So we deal with the most egregious cases. Now, the mission of all of these Crime Stoppers is to solve and prevent crime. When I took over, and shortly before I took over, we were starting to really expand that word prevention. The idea was, well, if John Smith murdered somebody and we find him, we've solved the crime because we found John Smith, and we've prevented one because John Smith can't murder the next victim. But we felt like, well, what if prevention is mitigation through education? What if it's going into the schools and saying, now, don't take a pill that you buy online because it could kill you. It could be laced with fentanyl. What if it's going into neighborhoods and talking about like safe running, safe shopping, safe online buying? What if we start doing proactive work? And I'm an academic at heart. I mean, I could still be in school today if it made sense, but we really started to dive into that. And so we're very different from the other organizations, and from our own, we've grown tremendously because our mission remains to solve and prevent crime. And that tip line is where we solve crime. But the prevention, we have a Safe School Institute that's the largest in the world under any Crime Stoppers umbrella. We offer free programming to all school districts in Houston and across the state, on 16 different topics, and that's always changing. We have a Safe Community Institute where we're doing the same in the community. We have a podcast, our own podcast, and then we have a research center. We do victim services and a lot of other things. So we've grown so much. We're not anywhere near what we were originally, but it's been a beautiful growth. It's been a natural growth, and we have a great team that's making everything happen.
So if a person, let's say somebody suffered a crime 15 years ago and they weren't aware of Crime Stoppers, or they're still, troubled with the loss of their loved one because of a crime, and they've just stumbled across you through this podcast and then said, well, that happened to me so long ago, I'm pretty sure that it's not applicable to me anymore. Is that a true statement?
No, well, if the case is unsolved, then absolutely call us. And if it's a felony case, we can start working that case. We will work with the investigators, of course, assigned to the case. We're civilians, and we have our law enforcement detail, and we're very careful to work hand in hand with the law enforcement. But on the flip side, when you've suffered loss due to crime, it's different than when you've suffered loss due to old age or even disease. Because on one hand, disease, while it is so unfair, it is a very organic, that's life type of issue.
Mm-hmm.
Crime is like, what? No, like it can't happen to me. It could have never happened to my child. Like we don't digest it the same. So the trauma, the impact from it is very different. And a lot of times there's these surviving victims or surviving family members want to do something. There's this feeling of like revenge. There's this feeling of there's got to be a change. There's this feeling of I cannot let this go. And we can funnel that into something healthy and productive. We're often put in a very odd position, Genevieve, because we'll have victims come and they'll call out elected officials and they'll speak with anger. And I one time had a really interesting conversation with our sheriff and Sheriff Gonzalez, and I said, I don't know what to do when the victim families, like, in their anger, call out like a sitting elected official. I don't know what to do. And he said, Rania, look, we all understand the grief that they feel. The anger, it's theirs to say. We all of us know we can't. Don't worry. We don't need to mitigate that. Let them speak. Let them say what they need to say. But let's then hold their hands and say, how do we turn this into something positive? If we've identified an issue with leadership, political, otherwise, blah, blah, there's a bunch of different genres, buckets we could go. Would you like to work with us together in a positive manner to help make a positive change and have your loved one have a lasting legacy? It's very healing.
It's kind of like giving them, it's empowering to them, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, I've always said, I work with patients who are dying, and I always sometimes find that educating the family about what to expect is the best thing we can offer at a time. Giving somebody a sense of control,
Yeah,
or a sense of direction over a situation they have absolutely no control over.
exactly.
I mean, you can't go back and rewind and keep the crime from happening, or the debt or the loss from happening. However, you can find a way to try to understand the sequence of events, try to understand the bigger, picture of how things happen in life and how that unfortunate event became part of your life. And okay, now it's there. What can we do with it?
Yes.
How can we make like you said, a positive change to move forward in this, what we call a new normal, right? Your life, like you said, is forever changed, but you have to kind of get back to some sense of functionality. You
Yes.
can't constantly function in anger,
Yep.
because, the anger breeds contempt, and contempt brings additional unhealthy behaviors that could affect so much more in your life that you don't realize, right? Like if you have other children you need to tend to, if you have a job you have to go to, these are important elements that you still need to be present in. However, you're not going to be able to do that if you can't figure a way to work through what has happened. And it's so wonderful to hear that. It sounds like you guys are the person to kind of hold their hand and say, come on, I'm going to walk with you through this journey. It's going to be a difficult journey, but we're going to walk through it together, and we'll get to the other side so you can look back on it and understand how things happened a little better.
We always say we can't change what happened to you or your loved one, but we can make a lasting legacy that is positive moving forward. And it's really hard because there is that moment of, I don't want positive. I don't want that to be my job. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
see. I don't want any of that. I don't care. I don't want that. I want my loved one back. I want to reverse,
Exactly.
so we see that. We see that often.
Well, and I
I,
think it's interesting too that, in a sudden death versus a death that, someone might be expected, through an illness, um, you find that there's kind of almost a reverse of the stages of grief.
yes.
And
Yep.
then there's a compounded stage of grief as well. And sometimes they probably don't realize what they're going through, but they're going through sometimes, maybe multiple stages at the
Hmm.
exact same time,
For sure. For,
which can be very difficult for people to grasp the concept of what they should be doing versus what they feel like they want to do,
you
right?
know, I always think like, I think about this a lot when you get on an airplane and you sit there and they give you the orderly instructions of what to do in case of an accident. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
sit with calm, put the mask on, make sure your seatbelt's flat. But in the reality of the crashing trauma, how you respond is not necessarily going to be like, okay, they said to sit quiet and now put the mask and make sure you have, and like as a parent, I'll be like, I don't care if I don't breathe. I've got to put the mask on my child. I'm not going to put
Exactly.
the mask on first. Like in reality, we might understand the different processes, but when you're in the crash, in that moment of trauma, you're going to deal how you deal because it's a fight for survival.
Exactly. Your body just automatically takes over. It's a fight or flight response. And
Yes.
if you've never experienced it, it's almost kind of an interesting concept of that. You look back and be like, did I really do that?
Yeah.
Did I do that? I don't remember doing it. I didn't even think about doing it.
Yes.
And I think that's the difference of usually we have a thought process that preempts what we're doing, correct? And in the flight or flight response, you're just doing. There's no thought to it.
I was in a mall in the Houston area many years ago. Honestly, it might have been like 6 years ago now. And I had my three kids, and they had two friends with them. And the mall food court has a carousel that's two floors. And so I had the youngers with me on the bottom floor and the older girls. And the older girls were like sixth, fifth grade, fourth grade, maybe, were on the second level. And all of a sudden, we heard shooting.
Oh,
And I thought, oh my gosh, there's a shooter in the mall. the, for me, because I live in this world, I was very calm. I had to get the younger girls out, call to the upper girls. They stopped the ride immediately, but everybody got off and get the older kids, walk to the nearest exit, which I already knew because I live that way. Like I live that my life is like, where's the nearest exit always?
mhm.
But I said, wait a minute, Rania, look around because I hope you'll never be in this situation again. Look around. And I noticed a guy next to me had his child in a stroller. They were just running out the mall. And for whatever reason, he stopped and tried to pick up his child, but never unlocked the carriage. And so he's fighting and pushed it because he wants to run holding his child. I understand it. But he wasted so much time. They left the stroller, the bag, the shoe, which by the way, yes, leave it all. But in the fight or flight, he wasn't even making rational decisions because
Mhm.
and I don't blame him. I of course. but it was very interesting to watch that, as much as you might talk about it or think about it. But here's the thing we always talk about with excessive training and discussion, and I experienced it personally, you can remove the immediate sense of chaos, like that spins in your,
Mm-hmm.
and start thinking rationally. Like, no, okay, wait a minute. I know that I have this many seconds before I can get out of here calmly. I know where the exit is. I know it's unlocked. I know my route. The sound is far away, like, because I've trained myself. So you can do that. And I know that's a little bit off topic, but I was
Well, no,
interested to watch.
I think it's helpful though, because this is a tool that we're providing to listeners, right? Is that yes, we always hope that we never experience a crime or any
Yes,
type of ill will towards our family, our loved ones, and our livelihood. But if there was a training to help people become more aware of their surroundings in a time when it's needed, you know, then I think that could be very helpful. So it's like, what would that training look like? Just like you said, if you do go in a mall, the first thing you do is look for the exits. Think of getting on that airplane and that safety briefing. Go into the mall with that same mindset of where is your nearest exit, what store are you going to, where are your children, what type of environment are they in a stroller, or are they walking with
yes.
you? Are they want children that like to wander off? Because if they happen to wander in that moment and something starts to happen, it's like all of a sudden now you're panicking, trying to find your dear child. And it's escalated now because instead of, I mean, you already know when you're looking for your child, that little elevation of
Oh,
adrenaline starts
yeah.
to creep up.
Yes, yes.
Can you imagine that now your child has stepped away from you and you hear gunfire? Now that adrenaline now has taken way over.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Mm-hmm.
might not be able to find your child when your child might have been two racks over,
Yes.
right?
And
So
it's interesting because you started by saying, when you lived in Europe, you noticed how sort of death averse that
denying.
denying we don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're so right, because we need to talk about all these things, whether it's how to go through life safely. And that's, by the way, that's not being paranoid. That's just
Mm-hmm.
being smart. That's all it is being smart. And you hopefully will never ever live with any issues. But you'll never regret being prepared. You'll never regret it. And it doesn't take that much to be prepared. It just takes a moment of pause, stop, let's think about this and talk about it. Similarly with death, I mean, going through my own father's passing, it's very hard to talk about. Dad, what do you really want? Do you, the only thing we had ever talked about is my dad said, I don't want to be in the ground. I want to be in a mausoleum. I don't want you to have to see me go into the ground. And so that's the only thing we had ever talked about. And in those last moments, I remember when the facility said he's entering hospice, he'll probably pass by the weekend. I had like a day or two where they said but remember, it was like a Sunday. She said by Tuesday he's not going to be able to answer you. So Sunday night, Monday, I said, ask him the questions you want, and I couldn't bring myself to do it because I also didn't want him to know we were there. I didn't want him to know we were in that moment. And so, how much better would it be if, like, my husband and I sat down now, healthy, happy, eating dinner? Hey, it's a morbid topic, I know, but like, if we were, what do you want?
And I think that's the problem. The problem is we label it as a morbid topic, right? And it shouldn't be.
You're right.
We
You're right.
it should be it's that hard conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to be had.
For sure.
Think about the weight that gets lifted off of you if you are going, if tomorrow you knew everything your husband wanted to happen to him. It's not that you should fear the loss of your husband. You should fear
Yeah.
not knowing what he wanted,
Yeah.
not knowing what was important to him as
Yes.
an individual at his time of life. Like your father said, it was important to him that he didn't want you guys to see him going into the ground. And I always find it very profound at how people are very expressive of what's
Mm.
important to them. When
Mm-hmm.
if you really think about it, it's more about what's important to you guys in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Because he was so worried about you seeing him going into the ground. But if you take it one step further, He's not here to have that effect upon him any longer. What if
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
were okay seeing him going into the ground?
Mm.
You know, and then people say, you know, I don't want to have a funeral. Well, you're not going to be here, but we need the
Yeah.
funeral because the funeral's for the people
Yeah.
you leave behind. We were robbed that of my grandparents. My grandparents said, oh, I don't want to waste money on a funeral. When we die, we already have our burial plots. We've already discussed everything with the funeral director. I was in Europe. I didn't even know my grandmother passed away. I got the message like a week later that my grandmother passed away,
Wow.
and there was no funeral. So there was this
Oh,
huge void and gap now that was present in my life forever because they didn't think about the profound effect it was going to have on those of us they've left behind. And I think also, you know, unfortunately, the criminals obviously will never think that. They're never going to think the impact that they are going to have on families for their
yeah.
entire lives from that one moment of an act that they choose to commit or choose to create. And I think that, you know, if we could only get into their minds and tell them, do you realize what you're doing here? Do you realize the ripple effect that you are about ready
And
to
I
begin?
I think there's so much that goes into the fact that even if you tell them, they don't care, and
Yeah.
why they don't care. And that's, I think, also very important to look at going back in time. What human interactions are they so lacking?
Mm-hmm.
Societies let them down, their parents have let them down, the systems let them down. You know, what is it that they're so lacking that they literally don't care? And we've got to go back in time for those people too. And that's what I'm saying. We are a very holistic organization. And we partner with other groups to say, like, do all parts of Houston have grocery stores? There are food deserts in Houston where you can't even get groceries. Do all parts of Houston, all the schools, the Title I schools, all the different, is there after school care? I mean, or are you just dismissed and go, good luck? You know, like there's a whole big picture we have to look at. And honestly, when somebody's committed a felony crime, which is where we focus, yes, you have to be tough in that moment because you've got to have some deterrent. They're not wired to have the deterrent. You've
Mm-hmm.
the society has to step in. And we're so thankful Crime Stoppers gets to play a role in that. And we hope to continue doing that. And we appreciate conversations like this that expand our message and put our organization in front of new audiences.
And I mean, we could go talking on forever about this stuff. I mean, it's just there's so many different segments to Crime Stoppers that I wish that we could uncover. And I understand that there's a lot of stuff that you guys do within the communities. If I have not been affected by a crime, but I want to do some preparation, where can I go? Where can I start seeking information to be prepared, to start putting stuff in my toolbox to make me a more wiser citizen, a more aware a citizen, or perhaps just being that citizen in our neighborhood that I can help others who have experienced this?
So everything we do is free, and I encourage people to go to crime-stoppers.org and look at our resource pages. And then I also encourage people to think about crime a different way. Crime is no longer just a robbery, a murder, a rape, an arson, a bank robbery. With the internet and smartphones and online technology, our children are being victimized daily. And so that is a huge area of focus for us. And even if you live in a beautiful home with a white picket fence and two dogs and affluent as can be, it doesn't matter what sort of adjectives describe your family. Every one of our children is at risk of facing some horrible public safety issue online. And so we do a tremendous amount of work in that space. We're in over 4,000 schools, all free, talking to children about how to be safe online, to mitigate, you know, victimization, or even becoming a bully and not knowing it, whatever it might be. So there's so many layers to what we do.
Well, and what you do is so very important, especially here in our city of Houston. And I am so grateful for all of the work that you guys do. If you have been a victim of crime, whether it's a virtual crime, a personal crime, or you've lost somebody, I really hope that you take advantage of the amazing resources that Crime Stoppers has to offer. And Rania, I want to say thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I mean, I really wish we could talk forever on this.
No, I appreciate it, Genevieve. This was so interesting. It was a new angle for us. We don't get to talk about this part a lot, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Well, hopefully we can maybe do a follow-up show because, like I said, there's a lot still left to be said. And I think that some of our listeners could hopefully benefit from a follow-up show.
Would love that.
Thanks.